Prime Minister of St Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, has issued an evacuation order effective immediately as conditions at teleSUR volcano deteriorate. In Brazil, the epidemiological crisis worsens as scientists have discovered a new coronavirus variant with 18 mutations. Kenya condemned the United Kingdom's decision to add the East African country to its coronavirus travel red list. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. The Prime Minister of St Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, has issued an evacuation order effective immediately as conditions at teleSUR volcano deteriorate. The immediate evacuation order applies to northeasterly and northwesterly communities in an area labelled the Red Zone, as they are in the immediate path of the raging volcano. The country is currently on red alert, which is the highest threat level, as it braces for heightened activity, with all emergency shelters activated. Earlier, Professor Richard Robertson, the lead scientist monitoring the volcano, reported that there had been a significant change in activity with the onset of tremors, accompanied by gas venting, which was an indication that explosions could occur. Neighbouring Barbados and St Lucia have committed to provide assistance for evacuation efforts.
Reiterate that a declaration has been made by me in respect of a disaster alert. Disaster alert means that there is a substantial prospect of a disaster of a volcanic kind to strike within a period of time, hours, days, or weeks.
And the Prime Minister of St Vincent and the Grenadines called for calm despite the volcano alert.
On this particular matter, we want to say that we do not need panic. We need to be calm. We need to be disciplined. We do not need to have any contentiousness. We don't need to have any confusion. If we are all calm and disciplined.
Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves also referred to the arrangements should an evacuation be required.
In the case of movement of persons, for instance, to say future, we have to make the requisite transportational arrangements by sea or by air, or both. As a consequence of this declaration, events have overtaken us in respect of the reopening of the schools. Therefore, the schools will not be reopened on the 12th of April, Monday the 12th of April. And the schools, we will expect, as far as is practical, for online teaching and learning to continue. The Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries, the Ministry of Social Development, the Ministry of Housing, the Ministry of Transport and Works, the Deputy Prime Minister are all very much engaged in this exercise, education and health, social development. So everyone has an important role to play. The Minister of State and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, she will be in touch along with the foreign governments.
The Colombian Institute for Development and Peace Studies reported the death of 4 people in a new massacre in the department of Cauca. According to preliminary reports, on Wednesday night, 5 people were attacked by armed men in the municipality of Santander de Quilichao. 3 people were killed on the spot, and the 4th lost his life while being transported to a health facility. So far, the victims have not been identified. The Regional Indigenous Council of Cauca also denounced that on April 6, Indigenous leader and human rights defender Elias Troches was the victim of an attack in the same department. According to the Institute, this is the fourth massacre registered in the Department of Cauca in 2021 and the 36th since President Ivan Duque took office in 2018. As part of its privatisation campaign, the Brazilian government of Jair Bolsonaro proceeded to auction the concessions of airports, railways and ports to private companies. During the first day of the handover of the public assets, the executive granted concessions for 30 years for 22 airports and $600 million, an amount much higher than expected. Experts assure that the transnational groups that have acquired the public transportation system at a low price will operate 11% of passenger traffic, equivalent to 24 million people. Social movements rejected the auction methods taking place during the health crisis, stressing that the revenue will not go to the health sector as claimed by the president. In the United States, at least 5 people were killed on Wednesday night after a shooting at a home in York County, South Carolina. According to York County Sheriff's Office, the victims are a doctor, his wife, their 2 underage grandchildren, and another person who was working at their home. A further individual was transported to hospital with serious gunshot wounds. The local authorities also said they've captured a suspect who may be a close neighbour of the victims, and also assured there is no active threat for the local community. During the ongoing murder trial against former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin on Wednesday, an expert police witness said the accused used a technique designed to deliberately inflict pain and subjected George Floyd for an unnecessary extended period. Chauvin is charged with murder and manslaughter for the death of George Floyd on May 25, 2020, in what is considered a trial not only against the former officer, but also on systemic racism in police practices in the United States.
Have an opinion to a degree of reasonable professional certainty whether the force used, as shown in Exhibit 254, whether that force being applied then for the restraint period, which you've defined as 9 minutes and 29 seconds, would constitute deadly force.
Yes.
And what is that opinion?
That it would.
And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. To discuss the situation as Ecuador prepares for the second round of the presidential elections this Sunday, we now welcome Fidel Narvaez, former Ecuadorian consul in London, to offer his views on this crucial vote. Fidel, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Fidel, what are the stakes for Ecuadorians in this Sunday's elections, and what are the different models that the two presidential candidates, Andrés Arauz and Guillermo Lasso, represent?
Well, there is so much at stake in this election. I would say that it's a crucial election, probably the more important election for Ecuador in modern history. To begin with, we need to come out of the nightmare which in the last 4 years the government of Lenin Moreno put Ecuador into. The government has launched such a fierce persecution and disrespect for basic human rights and political rights in Ecuador that in this election this has to finally end. And we have a clear election between two models. One, which is the progressive project that we had for 10 years with the Citizen Revolution, which did so much for us Ecuadorians in terms of reduction of poverty, reduction of inequalities, building new infrastructure, and basically many achievements in terms of human rights, economic rights, political rights. Or the neoliberal agenda, the neoliberal project that has been in place with Lenin Moreno in the last 4 years, which is represented by Mr. Guillermo Lasso, who has in fact colluded in government with Moreno in the last 4 years. So the choice there is very, very clear, and I very much hope that the Ecuadorians will choose the progressive project.
Fidel, even though the polls suggest a victory for Andrés Arauz, a significant portion of voters seem to be undecided. Former candidate Yaku Perez, who ran on an indigenous people's platform aiming to secure support from the left, is now calling to boycott the runoff, claiming that he was a victim of fraud. How may this affect the final outcome, and how big must Arauz's advantage be in order to avoid his victory being taken away by claims of fraud?
We need to understand that the indigenous movement, being a very important social movement in Ecuador, is not a monolithic entity. There are several divisions inside the indigenous movement, and not all of them are going to boycott the election. In fact, many indigenous leaders have already expressed publicly support for Andrés Arauz and the progressive project. Some of them will vote null, that's true, and some of them have even expressed support for Guillermo Lasso. So I think there's going to be an important percentage of people boycotting the election, but it's not going to be decisive. I think majority of the indigenous movement will vote for us because the agenda that the citizen revolution had for all Ecuadorians, including indigenous Ecuadorians, is very much in tune with the indigenous movement's own agenda. So we will need to win by a decent margin. That is true, because Mr. Lasso, in the previous election, he already wanted to present the framework of supposed fraud. But I'm confident that the Ecuadorians will give Mr. Arauz enough margin to put a clear victory on this election.
Fidel, as you said there, Andrés Arauz represents a coalition of progressive forces, such as those that supported former President Rafael Correa and the Citizens' Revolution. There's been a long and very strong campaign by right-wing sectors, supported by the media, against these forces, including political persecutions and authoritarian methods. Given a victory for Arauz, how would the new government deal with this kind of campaign? And how does the use of the media and social networks in this way influence government strategy?
Well, the attack against the progressives will continue. That's for sure. Even when Andrés will be in power, his priorities will be to rebuild the country, to tackle the sanitary emergency and the economic emergency. I don't think it's in anybody's interest to come with revenge or with vengeance tactics or agenda. I think the priority for him will be to focus on rebuilding the economy, tackling the sanitary emergency that has been disastrous, has been so negligently tackled by Moreno, that basically the victory that he's going to have will show why the Ecuadorians are doing the right choice in put him in charge of the economy and of Ecuador in these hard times in my country.
Fidel Narvaez, former Ecuadorian consul in London, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for offering your valuable insight into the presidential elections that will be held this Sunday in Ecuador. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And moving on to Brazil, the epidemiological crisis worsens as scientists in the southeastern city of Belo Horizonte have discovered a new coronavirus variant with 18 mutations. According to preliminary reports, the new variant shares characteristics with the Brazilian strains P1 and P2, and also with the South African variant, as well as the British strain. The experts also said it's too early to say whether this new strain is more contagious than the others, but stated that the identified patients infected with this variant had not travelled abroad, so analysis is underway to determine its origin. Brazil ranks second in the world in terms of COVID-19 cases, with over 13 million infections reported and more than 341,000 deaths. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Kenyan authorities have condemned the United Kingdom's decision to add the East African country to its coronavirus travel red list. Starting on April 9th, Kenyans or anybody transiting through Kenyan airports is banned from setting foot in the UK. In a strongly worded statement on Saturday, Kenya's Foreign Ministry said the decision was discriminatory and lacked logic and scientific knowledge of the disease or the spread of the pandemic. Nairobi also accused London of hoarding vaccines, stressing it has much more than it needs. The UK has ordered more than 400 million coronavirus vaccine doses for a population of around 67 million people. Meanwhile, Kenya, which has a population of 53 million, has received just over 1 million AstraZeneca vaccine doses through the COVAX initiative. Palestinians have dismissed the US decision to resume financial support to the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, noting that Palestinians will only be truly benefited when the US ends its support for the illegal Israeli occupation. The Biden administration's decision to restore US aid of about $235 million marked a sharp break with the policy of Donald Trump, who severed all financial assistance. The new funding is in addition to $15 million announced earlier by the United States in COVID assistance to Palestinians amid criticism that Israel, a leader in vaccinating its own people, has failed to vaccinate Palestinians in territories under its occupation, despite its legal obligation to do so. However, the UN agency has stressed its needs have increased due to COVID-19 and the hardships faced by Palestinian refugees living in Syria, Lebanon and Jordan.
These funds are politicized. The money that goes to the authority and UNRWA is politicized and used to pressure us, to weaken us politically and force us to make political concessions to coincide with the plans proposed by the United States and Israel.
With only 3 days to go until the presidential election in Benin, voters remain split, although current President Patrice Talon is expected to secure a second term in office.
The fact that the politicians got into the game, they made a political play. We are disappointed. Because politicians, we have profiteering politicians in this country. We have known profiteering politicians. I tell you, profiteers, they are not here to fight. President Patrice Talon, what he has done is enormous, because since 1960 we have not yet seen a president in Benin who has worked like that in this country. Seriously, in these 5 years that he has done many strange things. He has put things in order. Everything is going well.
In Myanmar, engineers, teachers and students came together in the southern city of Dawai to continue to protest against the February 1st military takeover. Despite 8 deaths at the hands of security forces in Dawai since February 1st, opponents of the military junta have maintained their presence on the streets, frequently managing to avoid clashes by changing the times of their mobilizations and breaking into smaller groups. According to the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners, around 600 civilians have been killed in the country and nearly 3,000 detained. An Iranian tanker has arrived in Syria to alleviate fuel shortages in the war-torn country that continues to suffer Western sanctions and terrorist attacks. The vessel transported 1 million barrels of crude oil to located on the west coast of the country. The oil arrives as United States troops illegally occupying areas of the country continue to loot 140,000 barrels of Syrian oil a day, which are transported through illegal border crossings into Iraq. In Sudan, at least 87 people were killed and 191 injured following strong episodes of intertribal violence in Janina city in western Darfur state. The latest clashes erupted from a shooting last Saturday that killed 2 people from the Masalit tribe in a camp for displaced people. After the incident, there were clashes between members of the Risegat and Masalit tribes, both with armed mobilization. On Monday, Sudanese authorities declared a state of emergency and sent military personnel to the region with the aim of controlling the situation. Meanwhile, the Central Committee of Sudanese Doctors reported on Wednesday a shooting at vehicles transporting health workers to UN warehouses in Genina without reporting fatalities. In Mozambique, local campaigners have called for more support for children in the northern Cabo Delgado province following the recent insurgent attack on the coastal town of Palma. Violence has forced at least 11,000 people to flee the strategic town, the hub of a giant gas project featuring foreign investment, with thousands more reported to be trapped inside the area. Those fleeing the violence have been arriving to different cities of the country by foot, road and boat since March 24th in the aftermath of the attacks. Experts have warned that experiences of violence can have a long-term impact on children's lives, which must be addressed. Based on testimonies from people abducted by the rebels and mothers of children that were kidnapped in the area, a lot of minors were kept in camps where insurgents live and trained to work for them.
We are afraid. There were different kinds of kidnappings taking place. Sometimes it was said that there were women abducted, but actually there were a lot of people being kidnapped. And in the middle of those people there were children, so we are afraid. Some of the people that went to that place, the camp of the insurgents, they saw children. It is not just to send them to the school, and that's it. They need a follow-up, they need proper food, extracurricular education, accompany their families, and monitor how they are spending their time.
And we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For teleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.